is Sunrise Sunset, the Jewish Family in Transition, and I'm Audrey Gordon. My guest today is Dr. Judith Heilizer, and we will be talking about the problems that a family has with a handicapped child. And another time we're going to talk about the problems of the handicapped child, that is, the child's perceptions and feelings in a world which does not quite fit the way that they see themselves. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
When a family has a handicapped child, they may have a sense of loss about what is happening to their life. And those of us who have children who are not handicapped, perhaps they may say to us, well, you don't know what it's really like. What would you say back to them?
Well, the loss that is part of the loss that comes with having a handicapped child is really no different from the loss you experience when you lose anything. All of us have lost things from the time we were very small and a ball rolled out of our reach to the time we're adults and we lose people who are meaningful in our lives. So we all have experience with loss. And what happens is that the same kinds of coping techniques which we used for the losses from simple to complex in our lives with our non-handicapped children apply when we need to use them for coping with the loss about having a handicapped child.
You are a psychotherapist in private practice.
Yes.
And you work a great deal with families who have handicapped children and the children themselves.
Yes, I do.
What do you tell parents when they discover that their child is handicapped? How do you help them to cope with that?
Well, coping is the direct outgrowth of a change in values. The change in values is a direct outgrowth of grieving, and it is the grieving which, if it is accomplished appropriately and well and thoroughly, that gives us the opportunity to change our values so that we can then develop coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. The grieving, what is it that the mother grieves for?
Well, specifically, when we set about having a child, we invest that child with a kind of magic, fantasies about what this child might bring to us, might make right that wasn't right within us, might do for us in terms of our extension of ourselves into a lifespan that is extended through our children.
The father who wants his son to grow up and come into the family business, or who wants his son to be on the football team the way that he was on the football team?
Yes, or perhaps because he never did get to be on the football team. We invest our children with a kind of a dream. Sometimes the dream has aspects of, I'm having this baby because my husband really wants a child. I'm not all that sure I do, but he does, and it's a gift to him. Sometimes it is a gift to our parents who are sitting there and saying, where are my grandchildren? And if you then come up with a handicapped child, then the tainted gift is there, the gift that you have given that is not perfect, that you cannot take back to exchange, in addition to the tremendous anxiety that is generated by the broken dream. And it is the mourning about the broken dream, the dream which can no longer function, the dream about having a whole child, which needs to be done. And it is the mourning work that helps us to move away from not being able to move out of that condition.
If the parents can mourn, can they then see the child as a child? That is, value the child as a child?
The ultimate outgrowth of successful mourning will be to see that you have a child who is handicapped rather than that you have a handicapped child.
Would you expand on that?
If you say, I have a child, comma, who is handicapped, then you say, first and foremost, I have a child.
Oh.
When you say, I have a handicapped child, then you say, first and foremost, I have a handicap which happens to be attached to the child. And in fact, it's interesting to think about the fact that when there is a handicapped child in the family itself becomes an exceptional family. The effect of the handicap pervades all of what the family does or can do.
Well, that's true for any kind of apparent dysfunction. I mean, alcoholism does that in families. Even a chronic illness on the part of an adult will pervade the entire family.
Yes, but there are some specific kinds of differences. when you have a handicapped child, as a parent, you are stuck with some feelings which are not considered in general to be nice.
Like what?
Like, for instance, a very, very great anger. The anger that says, it isn't fair. Why me? What did I do? The experience of having a handicapped child begins to rattle at your existential values. It rattles at responsibility. Why is it I who was chosen to spend most of my life in the fatiguing and tedious and repetitive caretaking businesses around ameliorating the life of my handicapped child? There is a very great sadness that has to do with one's sense of, I have no power, I have no chance to set this right, I have very little value.
I can't do it over again?
I can't do it over again.
In a family that has a handicapped child, are they reluctant to, if it's the first child, let's talk about birth orders perhaps, because that affects the family. If it's a first child, are they reluctant to have another, or do they hurry up quick and have another to see if they can do it right?
I think that is a function of how well the grieving has taken place, the grieving and mourning, all of the trips through all of the difficult feelings which help you to come to a place where you can more adequately change your values and then to cope. Sometimes people rush out to buy a new puppy when the puppy has been killed, and it turns out to be not that good a thing because the old puppy didn't have a chance to be mourned and the child didn't have a chance to mourn the puppy. On the other extreme, the parent who, considering that in some cases genetic counseling is indicated, who does not have any reason to worry about having a second child, and delays the situation or perhaps abandons it altogether, also lets us know that his or her grieving has not been fully completed and that his values have not had a chance to be restructured.
There must be a tremendous fear that goes on during a second pregnancy after a handicapped child.
Oh, I think so, and the fear takes many forms. There is a fear for the new child. There is a fear for the old child, the handicapped child.
What is the fear for the old?
How will I give all of me, as I used to the care and concern of my handicapped child, when indeed I want to and intend to love again? There is a fear that your love will not be quite enough to reach around both children or all three children. And that's a very common experience which we tend to have when we have second and third children.
Is there not also a fear that perhaps you don't know how to be the mother of a normal child?
Indeed, we learn our roles and we learn them well, and sometimes we overlearn them. And one of the points I like to think about with the parents I see is that we must make time and space for all the terrible feelings that come on being angry and being depressed and being
It's all right to be a crabby
fearful.
person?
It is necessary to be a crabby person. Each of us has living within us a very, very crabby person. And that person needs to be seen, has value, and needs to be attended to. Often parents of handicapped children, in an attempt to make good, will try not to take anything for themselves, and it is a road to failure. It breeds an enormous amount of anxiety.
You mean to be selfish about themselves or their time or their needs? They look at the child and they say, oh, this poor thing, how can I be selfish for me when he or she has to live that way?
Yes, and in fact, often the parent attaches a sense of responsibility to it. When you talk to parents of handicapped children, you become impressed with how parents like to figure out why this happened in an attempt to control the next situation, and will come up with painfully self-destructive explanations about why indeed they were elected to have this handicapped child.
Now, you and I have both heard people say, is it a reaction to the handicap? Well, God sent us this child to teach us how to be less selfish, or we have become better, or God knew that we could do it. How do you respond to that?
Well, my reaction to that is that if you can do it, and if you have become better, then your grieving and mourning has done its job, and whether or not God helped you with that is a matter of your own persuasion. The point is that you're doing it and that you can do it.
But it's not fair to think of a handicapped child coming into a family as a test.
I think if one were to need that kind of a test in order to see if one can make it as a person, that would not be a real good thing about parenting. I think people often need to find a reason where there doesn't seem to be a reason, and the purpose of that is to gain some control.
Yes.
If you can attach a reason to something, you can then control it the next time around. I had occasion to talk with a mother of a multiply handicapped child who suffered from numerous physical absences. In one half of his body, half the bilateral organs were not present, including the left arm and part of the left leg. And the mother came in for her first interview with me and attempted to do just that. Why were we chosen to have this child? And she looked and looked for reasons, and then she decided that perhaps it was the strong tea she drank during her pregnancy. Now, off the top of my head, that sounds absurd, but I think it is very important to assign parents the opportunity to find reasons, because it's the initial run-on on making some sense out of an otherwise uncopable with situation. So we honor and we pay attention to the reasoning finding that parents tend to do.
But you wouldn't support the idea that it was strong tea, because then it's something that she had a choice about.
You would give it the value as part of the coping mechanism, and then you would deal with the fact that that is not what it's all about, and deal with her around her anxiety about what has happened to her.
What happens in families when the handicapped child comes in the middle or at the end in terms of the relationships among siblings?
Siblings of handicapped children have a very special problem. They also go through the mourning phases which the parents go through: the denial, the anxiety, the depression, the guilt, the anger. They also experience some of the fears and some of the loneliness which parents of handicapped children experience.
Are you talking about social loneliness?
Social loneliness
In other
and
words,
isolation.
You as a family, you're different, or your brother is different, so I'm now going to treat you differently because your brother is different.
Yes. Society tends to look on a family as one of its members stand out as being a such and such family. So when there's a handicapped child, the family is viewed as being exceptional or different.
Or handicapped.
Or handicapped. And parents and siblings absorb that view as well, because they come up against that so much of the time. Now, children, more than anything, normally developing children want to be like everybody else. That is to be like God, to be like everybody else. So therefore, to be different poses its own special problems. Children who have handicapped siblings often experience a great deal of confusion. They do not quite understand what it's all about. They don't have the adult capacities to integrate the meaning of the handicap, and therefore are at a loss to say to other children, this is what is. There's a mystique and an unexplainableness about that little brother or sister who doesn't function like other people.
Don't they also feel guilty?
There is a guilt. There is, why was I spared? Why am I okay? It is something with which we're very, very familiar. There's also embarrassment. There are the deep, dark feelings of embarrassment that come to fore when you're with other people. You may be just fine when you're in your house and your strange little sibling does his or her thing, but when you're at McDonald's and people stop and stare, or maybe nudge each other, or maybe make comments, or maybe giggle, then all your adjustment is hard put to handle that kind of onslaught. is an assault on the sibling's identity in this way.
Their identity, it seems to me, can be assaulted in another way. I know that in families where a child is dying or is dead, that sometimes the response of the siblings is to become ill as a way of getting attention from the parent, or to see that the handicapped child is getting a different kind of love and attention that they don't get. Can we talk about that for a while?
Yes, there's a problem of identification. We often see that the sibling will develop some other kind of thing in order to draw upon himself some of the presumed goodies which the handicapped child gets from his parents. On the other hand, there's often an opposite reaction, which is equally troubling. Frequently, the sibling will take upon himself the second parenting, the becoming the little other strong parent.
You have to take care of your sister. He's special. He needs you more than other brothers are needed. Therefore, you have a responsibility to this child, perhaps appropriate, inappropriate?
Well, it can be both. Sometimes parents elect the sibling to that situation. I had occasion to know a woman who told me that she went ahead and had the second child in order that her first cerebrally damaged child would have a companion.
I've heard someone say that they would have someone to take care of them after the parents died.
That is another extension of the sibling situation into a caretaker situation. Children tend to handle that in interesting ways. They develop within themselves deep, dark fantasies which do not generally see the light of day except often in the therapist's office or through some other channel, which are the fantasies of pain and destruction and not wishing to be part of that and not wishing to have that brother or sister and doing something about that situation.
The pain or destruction of the handicapped child.
So that they can finally be free. Their dreams often reflect that. And they'd like to point out again that all of these are coping mechanisms, not to be maligned, but to be applauded as ways in which people deal with...
To be released, not to be shut up.
Yes, there's a huge difference between feeling angry and killing someone. The feeling rage is a necessary and palliative experience that allows you to work toward coping. That is very different from acting out rage. Children need to know that.
So that if a child were to express their feelings of hostility towards a handicapped child, then the parents shouldn't shush them up or tell them that they were bad or that they shouldn't feel that way, but to say, we may have some of those feelings within ourselves as well.
We do, and we need to help each other. And when we think about coping, that is probably the most potent force that people have to overcome and get through the mourning and grieving and all of its raucously painful counterparts. Shared grief is easier grief. Grief that can be laid open is grief that tends to dissipate more easily.
Grief that can be comforted.
Yes.
Is grief that can be alleviated.
Yes.
And we don't live in a society that allows us to comfort our grief openly.
Yes, in fact, so many of the things we do in grieving when we mourn the cherished dream that we have to give up are things which are not acceptable. Depression is mediated by psychotherapy or pills, and so is anxiety. And so when a person needs to do some denying to put some distance between himself and the tremendous awareness of the disruption in his life through his child's handicap, we say, well, snap out of it and don't deny and face facts. So often in our society, the very mechanisms of coping look pathological. And well-meaning friends, relatives, and therapists often say, abandon that. And I would like very much for us to attend to the meaning and the importance of all of that, because those are the pieces out of which we construct a new dream. And the new dream is that which we need to form an attachment to our handicapped child and to reattach to ourselves.
When you say form an attachment, you mean to the child as child, to what it is that the child can give realistically to the parent.
Indeed.
But it seems to me that a handicapped child can give something to a parent in terms of validating their parenting in a very significant way.
I think that is what keeps most parents of handicapped children going. And in those children for whom there is very little feedback, as there is in some of the children who have very, very, very severe disabilities which interfere with communication on all levels, often the parent has to muster every little bit of internal attachment to the child in order to still draw from the child that kind of affirmation of his parenting. I'm reminded of a situation where a pair of elderly parents had a multiply handicapped child who was severely physically disabled, profoundly retarded, and deaf and blind. And I met them in the home. And I met them at a picnic. And the picnic was visited by a local celebrity. And the parents brought this little body, which they carried everywhere, up to the front to see the local, literally to see the local celebrity. And they turned to me with their faces absolutely aglow with joy and said to me, "We're so glad it's such a beautiful day. See what a wonderful time he is having." It was a marvelous experience.
What is it like? We've been talking about the handicapped child, but there's so many definitions, there's so many parameters of what is a handicapped child. What is it like when you have a child who you know will not live to adulthood, or you know that you have a child that might require institutionalization, or that you have a child who does not need to go to an institution and will not die? I mean, it seems to me that those are three different spaces.
Mm-hmm. And I think each of them requires a different kind of attachment and then a learning to detach. I think the core difficulty in all three of these situations is that you do your grieving and mourning, changing your values so that you can then attach, knowing that you're going to have to undo the attaching and detach in order to once again cope with your life after the child will no longer be yours.
With a child that you are told has a limited lifespan, 10 years, 15 years, perhaps 20, wouldn't there come a point in living with that child where you might say, die already?
Of course. And the deep dark...
I think people don't like to acknowledge
yes,
that's true.
Yes. And the deep dark recesses of our feelings when we are harried and fatigued beyond repair because we have been spending 18, 20 hours a day in activities which we know will not do anything except prolong something of life and something of the quality of life for a very limited amount of time. The normal response to that is, no more. I don't deserve this. I don't want it. Let it be gone.
In the next few minutes, how does a parent make a decision about institutionalization? You've described a profoundly retarded child which might be able to be institutionalized. Is there a special kind of family that can keep a child at home? Are there some families that ought to institutionalize? How do you help them make the decision?
It's an incredibly difficult question to begin to even think about, leave alone to answer. And I'd like to pull in something that you discussed early, the differential effect on one parent as compared with another. When you have this situation, it is almost always, even though in a handicapped situation parental roles tend to shift because both parents need to plow in different ways than they have. Traditionally, almost always the mother is the one who has more of the day-to-day, back-breaking, painful, difficult to integrate into relationships with this child. The father comes at it generally somewhat later, having been protected from the truth for longer periods of time because the mother really knows from her own dealing with children that things aren't right, and she knows this sooner generally than the dads. So often that becomes an area of discord between moms and dads.
Yes.
What needs to be done is for moms and dads between themselves to come to a point where they can appreciate each other's contribution, each other's pain, and work through what they can do, attending also to what they cannot do and what is not reasonable.
So one of the things you're saying is that when the decision perhaps for institutionalization comes, it may be based on the marriage and how that works, and then the survival of the rest of the family. And it can be a variable decision from family to family, not necessarily having to do with the child's condition.
In fact, I would even strengthen your statement to the point of saying it is primarily a family decision, in the sense that there are always others who will tell you what you ought to be feeling, but it can only be brought off within the family, one way or the other. So it is primarily
So a family might
decision.
elect to keep a child at home that was very severely handicapped, but that was something they could do and that the whole family could do.
Absolutely.
And when you say family decision, it also means that other children in the family, if they're of appropriate ages, should have a voice.
Of course,
in
they
this
need to be
decision.
part of that, because the success of this situation, to a very large extent, depends on everyone.
What happens when the mother has been taking care of a child at home? Very quickly, we only have a few minutes. And then now the child starts a school of some sort. That is, the child enters the social world and is no longer protected by the home.
That becomes a second recapitulation of the early morning, because now the mom and the dad and the others in the family have to once again go through the mourning that comes from an increased awareness of how different their child is from others. It happens again at a time when the child would become an adolescent, would normally have graduated high school, would normally have become independent, and also at a time when parents begin to think about that they might not be there forever.
So in other words, at each developmental crisis, you mourn the loss of that piece of development that is not there.
Over and over again. And you need to do it. It is a necessary step in your attaching to a new dream which has all of the realities of the handicap within it.
Judith, we're going to do more on this because we want to talk about the handicapped child and what they do. We are out of time, and I thank you very much for coming. I know that you've helped a great many people out there. It's not a subject that people talk about as readily as they should. My guest today has been Dr. Judith Heilizer on the faculty of Northwestern Medical School and a psychotherapist in private practice. I am Audrey Gordon. This is Sunrise Sunset, the Jewish Family in Transition. If you have questions, please write to the Jewish Federation, WJUF, 1 South Franklin, Chicago, Illinois, and if you have some specific questions for the show, we will be happy to answer them for you. Thank you again, Dr. Heilizer.